Claire Navarro, a single mother, former nurse, struggling waitress Dominic Harlow, a cold, arrogant billionaire real estate mogul Lily Harlow, Dominic's teenage daughter, and Claire's son Marcus, a mother, humiliated and cast aside, must watch her son rise and ultimately save the one person her enemy loves most, why Dominic is so closed off, and what secret connects their past's redemption. Forgiveness and the humbling of a proud man by the very family he discarded appearance. Dark wavy hair usually pulled back in a bun, tired brown eyes that still carry warmth, a faded scar on her left hand from a grease burn she got working a double shift. She wears a mustard yellow waitress uniform 5 days a week. Personality quietly fierce, deeply loving, proud without being arrogant. She apologizes too much and works too hard. Fear that her son will grow up ashamed of her dream to become a registered nurse again. She let her license lapse after her husband died secret. She was accepted to nursing school the same week her husband's drunk driving accident left her a widow and $80,000 in debt. Character arc. From a woman who has learned to accept invisibility to a woman who stands tall and is seen appearance tall for his age, with his late father's jaw and his mother's eyes. Always has a biology textbook somewhere on him. Wears second-hand sneakers that he keeps impossibly clean. Personality gentle, brilliant, a little lonely. He makes dark jokes when he's nervous. Fear that if he becomes successful, he'll lose his mother. That rising means leaving her behind. Dream. To become a trauma surgeon's secret, he has been secretly applying for medical scholarships under a fake address because their apartment is in such a rough zip code he feared it would hurt his chances. Character arc. From invisible kid to young man who proves that goodness is not weakness. Appearance, silver temples, tailored suits that cost more than Claire's rent, a jaw that hasn't softened in 20 years. Handsome in the way that closed doors are handsome, impressive but cold. Personality, ruthless in business, dismissive of people he considers beneath him, but carries a grief so private it has calcified into cruelty. Fear, losing his daughter Lily. She is the only softness left in him. Dream, that Lily becomes everything her mother never got the chance to be. Secret. Lily's mother, Dominic's late wife, came from poverty, and Dominic has spent 20 years trying to erase any reminder of that world, including himself. Character arc. From a man who uses wealth as a wall to a man broken open by the very grace he once rejected. Appearance blonde, like her father but with her mother's quiet eyes. Thin in a way that worries her doctors. She carries a worn copy of The Secret Garden everywhere. Personality, sweet, perceptive, and desperately lonely inside a mansion full of staff. Fear that her father doesn't actually see her, only the idea of her dream, to have one real friend. Secret. She has been sneaking out to volunteer at a community garden 3 blocks from the Harlow Tower, the same community garden where Marcus tends plants on Saturday mornings. Claire's mother. A retired cafeteria worker with arthritic hands and a laugh like a gospel choir. She watches Marcus after school and prays every morning at 5 a.m. for both of them. The attending physician who first notices Marcus's instincts during the crisis. A Nigerian-American surgeon who grew up in public housing in Detroit. He becomes Marcus's mentor. The marble floor of Harlow Tower was so clean you could see your own reflection in it. Claire Navarro saw hers and wished she hadn't. She looked tired. She had ironed her blouse at midnight, the only hour Marcus was asleep, and she could use the bathroom counter as an ironing board without waking him. The iron had left a faint crease anyway, a thin diagonal line across her left shoulder that she'd tried to hide with her hair. It hadn't worked. Navarro, the receptionist, called out, not looking up from her screen. Claire stood, smoothed her blouse, and walked toward the elevator. The position was Administrative Coordinator for Harlow Development Group's Community Outreach Division. The posting had said they were looking for someone organized, compassionate, experienced with people. Claire had written a 2-page cover letter. She had listed every skill she owned, her 5 years as a triage nurse, her 3 years as a waitress, learning to manage 12 tables and 30 personalities at once, her ability to stay calm when everything was on fire. She had stayed up until 2 a.m, making sure every word was right. The elevator opened on the 14th floor. A woman in a sharp navy blazer led her down a hallway that smelled like fresh flowers and ambition. Through the glass walls, Claire could see people working at standing desks, talking into wireless earpieces, staring at monitors full of numbers. She thought of her own desk, the kitchen table with the wobbly leg, the sticky note Marcus had left her that morning, "You're going to get it, Mom. You always do." She had folded that note and put it in her bra pocket, right next to her heart, because she was 34 years old, and her son's belief in her was the most precious thing she owned. The conference room was glass and chrome. There were 2 people across the table, a woman in HR who smiled too quickly, and a man at the head of the table who did not look up when Claire walked in. Dominic Harlow. She recognized him from the company website. In his photo, he had looked merely serious. In person, he looked like a man who had decided long ago that warmth was a liability. "Miss Navarro," the HR woman said, "please sit." Claire sat. "Tell us about yourself," the HR woman continued. Claire spoke clearly. She talked about her nursing background, her ability to communicate across socioeconomic lines, her experience coordinating volunteers at a community pantry. She talked about why community outreach mattered to her, not as a corporate checkbox, but as something real, something she had lived. Dominic Harlow had not looked at her once. He was scrolling through something on his phone. His jaw was set. His posture said, "I am doing you a courtesy by being in this room." Claire kept talking. She felt the sweat beneath her ironed blouse. She felt the slight wobble in her voice that came when she was nervous and trying not to be. Then he looked up. Just for a moment, just long enough to take her in, the creased blouse, the tired eyes, the worn leather portfolio she'd had since nursing school. He looked back down. "Thank you," he said. The words were empty. A hand dismissing a gnat. "Mr. Harlow," Claire said, and something rose in her chest, a quiet bravery she didn't plan. "I noticed you haven't looked at my resume." He looked up again. This time slower. "I've read your resume, Miss Navarro. Then you know I have direct experience with... I know you've been working as a waitress for 3 years. His voice was flat. Not cruel exactly, just indifferent, which was somehow worse. The role requires someone who can interface with city officials, corporate donors, and press. We need polish. Credibility. The word credibility landed like a hand to the face. Claire held his gaze for 3 seconds, 3 full seconds. Then she stood, took her portfolio, and said, "Thank you for your time." She walked back to the elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. She did not cry. She would not cry here, on this marble floor, under these recessed lights, in front of the receptionist who had never once made eye contact with her. The elevator opened. She stepped in. The doors closed. And then she saw him. Marcus was sitting in the lobby biology textbook, open on his knees, earbuds in. He had taken 2 buses to get here. He had sat here for the entire hour of her interview because he wanted to walk her home. He pulled out one earbud when he saw her face. He didn't ask how it went. He just stood up, picked up his backpack, and fell into step beside her. After half a block, his hand found hers and held it. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Then Marcus said quietly his loss. And Claire laughed, a small, broken, real laugh, and held her son's hand tighter. Chapter 2. The world they live in their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like other people's cooking and old carpet. It had 2 rooms if you counted the kitchen as a room, which they did because you had to. Marcus slept on a pull-out sofa in the living area. He had decorated the wall above it with a hand-drawn diagram of the human circulatory system that he'd made in 7th grade and never taken down because, he said, it kept him focused. A blue line for veins, a red line for arteries, labels in his careful printing. Claire's bedroom had a window that faced a brick wall. She had hung a calendar photo of a Montana mountain range over the window so she could see something green when she woke up. Sandra Reyes, Claire's mother, was in the kitchen when they got home. She had made sopa de fideo, thin pasta in tomato broth with cilantro, and she looked at Claire's face and said nothing except, "Wash your hands. It's ready." Sandra had the wisdom of a woman who had survived enough disappointment to know that sometimes a bowl of soup is the right response, and words are not. They ate at the wobbly-legged kitchen table. Marcus told them about his biology quiz. He had gotten 98%. He'd missed a question about mitochondrial DNA and was still annoyed about it. Claire watched him talk, the way his hands moved when he explained something, the way his eyes lit up when he got to the part of science that excited him, which was almost all of it. And she felt the familiar ache of a parent who loves someone so much it borders on terror. She had become a nurse because she wanted to help people. She had become a mother and learned what wanting to help someone really meant. After dinner, while Sandra washed dishes, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his textbook, and Claire stood at the sink pretending to dry a pot, but really just standing still for a moment. "Mom," Marcus said without looking up. I looked up the position you applied for. The guy who runs that company, Harlow, his wife died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Stage 4. Claire turned. Marcus looked up. "I'm not saying it excuses anything. I'm just saying people who are rude are usually carrying something really heavy. That's all. 16 years old." Claire put down the pot and went to her room and cried for exactly 7 minutes. Then she washed her face, made a cup of tea, and started looking for other job listings. 3 days a week, Marcus volunteered at the East Side Community Garden, a half-acre of raised beds and fruit trees tucked between a laundromat and a tire shop on Clement Street. He had discovered it at 13, when he'd read a study about urban gardening's effect on youth anxiety, and decided that if it was good enough for a peer-reviewed journal, it was good enough for him. He grew tomatoes and kale, and a particularly determined cucumber vine that had taken over an entire trellis. He taught kids from the neighborhood how to test soil pH. He was, in the language of the garden's older volunteers, a natural. He was there on a Saturday morning in late September, up to his elbows in a compost bed, when he noticed the girl. She was standing at the edge of the garden, holding a copy of The Secret Garden, looking at the rows of plants with an expression he recognized immediately. "Longing, you can come in," Marcus said without looking up. "It's open to everyone." She hesitated, then stepped inside. "I've walked by 100 times," she said. Her voice was careful, like someone who didn't speak much to strangers. "I know, I've seen you." She sat down on a low bench nearby. She watched him work. He didn't perform or explain, he just worked, turning the compost with steady hands, checking moisture levels, talking quietly to himself the way he always did when he was concentrating. After a while, she said, "What are you checking for?" "Temperature. Compost needs to be between 130 and 160 degrees to break down properly." He held up the thermometer. "Today it's 141, which means it's doing exactly what it's supposed to." She looked at the thermometer. "I didn't know dirt had a temperature." "Everything has a temperature. You just have to know where to look." She smiled then. It was a careful smile, but it was real. "I'm Lily," she said. "Marcus." They shook hands over a compost bed, her hands clean and his hands dirty, and something quiet and important began. Chapter 3, 2 worlds. One secret. They met at the garden every Saturday for 3 weeks before they exchanged phone numbers. Lily had started bringing a small notebook. She wrote down the things Marcus told her about nitrogen cycles, about the difference between clay and loam, about why tomatoes crack when they get too much water after a drought. She asked good questions. She retained everything. Marcus noticed this. He noticed most things about Lily in the way that you notice someone when they're the kind of person who makes you feel both comfortable and curious at the same time. He did not know she was a Harlow. She was wearing thrift store clothes when they met, soft jeans with a frayed hem, an oversized flannel, old sneakers. She had told him she went to a school on the East Side, which was technically true. She attended East Ridge Academy, which was on the East Side, though it charged $45,000 a year in tuition. She had not told him about the tower, about the driver, about the team of tutors who came to their penthouse 4 evenings a week, about the reason she snuck away on Saturday mornings while her father's housekeeper assumed she was sleeping. She had not told him because, for the first time in her life, she was just a girl in a garden who liked plants and had found someone who talked to her like she was a real person. Marcus had not told her much either. He hadn't mentioned the pull-out sofa or the wobbly table or the waitress uniform or the job rejection. He talked about biology. He talked about his grandmother's cooking. He talked once for 20 minutes about the mechanics of the human heart after they found a dead bird, and he tried to explain to Lily why the bird's heart, though tiny, had been doing the same fundamental job as a human one. "It just stopped," Lily said, looking at the bird. "Everything stops eventually," Marcus said. "The job is to do the most you can while it's going." Lily wrote that down in her notebook. Meanwhile, Claire had found a new job, better hours, slightly better pay, at a diner called Rosie's on 5th, 12 blocks from their apartment. She came home smelling like syrup and grease and wore it without complaint. She had also quietly re-enrolled in an online pre-nursing refresher course that she did on her phone during her break, balancing the screen on her knee in the back booth of the diner. She had not told Marcus. She didn't want him to worry about the cost. She had not told Sandra either. Sandra would have offered money she didn't have. and Claire would rather fall on her own than pull her mother down with her. It was the fourth Saturday when everything shifted. Lily arrived at the garden earlier than usual, and she wasn't wearing the flannel. She was wearing a light blue sweater, and there was a car, a dark sedan, idling half a block away that Marcus noticed but didn't think much of. She looked pale. "You okay?" Marcus asked. "Fine." She sat down on the bench and opened her notebook. "What are we doing today?" Turning over the winter beds, putting them to rest. He looked at her. "You sure you're fine?" "I get these headaches," she said. "They come and go. How long have you had them?" "A few months. Have you seen a doctor?" She smiled faintly. "I've seen approximately 9 doctors." Something in her voice told him the headaches weren't the whole story. He didn't push. He handed her a pair of gloves and showed her how to pull the dead tomato vines from the soil without disturbing the root structure of the winter greens growing beneath. They worked in silence for a while. Then Lily said, without looking up, "My dad doesn't know I come here." Marcus kept pulling vines. "Parents usually don't know everything. He thinks I spend Saturday mornings studying." "Do you study?" "Yes, just not on Saturday mornings." She paused. He would never approve of this. Of a garden? Of anything he can't control the quality of. Marcus sat back on his heels and looked at her. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." She looked at him. "But here I feel like nobody's managing me." He nodded slowly. He understood that more than she knew. Chapter 4. When the ground shifts 3 weeks later, Claire lost her job at Rosie's. Not fired. Worse than fired. The diner was closing. A development company had bought the building and was converting it into luxury condominiums. The sign on the door of the development company, which Claire saw when she arrived for her morning shift to find a notice taped to the glass. Reed, Harlow Development Group. She stood in front of that sign for a long time. Then she took out her phone and texted Marcus, "Change of plans tonight. Let's make soup." She did not mention whose company had bought the building. Marcus found out on his own 3 hours later when he walked past the diner on his way from school. He saw the sign. He stood in front of it the way his mother had. He felt something cold and careful settle in his chest. He did not tell her that he'd seen it. He went home and made soup. He was the better cook between them, a fact Claire blamed on Sandra's genetics. And they ate dinner and talked about his scholarship interview, which was coming up that Friday. The Hudson Foundation for Medical Excellence was awarding 3 full scholarships to high school students with demonstrated academic achievement and financial need. Marcus's biology teacher, Mr. Osai, had nominated him. "What do I wear?" Marcus asked. "Your good shirt, the blue one. The collar's a little tight. I'll let it out tonight." "Mom, you don't have to, Marcus. Let me let out your collar." He laughed. She laughed. Sandra called from the other room. "Wear the blue shirt, mijo. Blue is the color of intelligence." "That's not scientifically supported, Grandma. It's spiritually supported. Same thing." That night, after Marcus was asleep and Sandra had gone home, Claire sat at the kitchen table with her phone and her refresher course module and a cup of cold tea. And she made a list. On one side, what she had. On the other side, what she needed. She looked at the list for a long time. Then she added one line to the "What I Have" column, in small letters, Marcus, and closed her notebook. Chapter 5, the moment everything connects the scholarship interview, was on a Friday morning at a downtown office building. Marcus wore the blue shirt. Claire had let out the collar perfectly. He sat in a waiting room with 6 other students, all of them looking sharp, looking polished, looking like kids whose parents had paid for SAT prep courses and interview coaching. Marcus had prepared by reading the Hudson Foundation's mission statement 17 times and practicing answers to anticipated questions in the bathroom mirror every morning for a week. He was called third. In the conference room sat 3 interviewers, including a man Marcus didn't recognize at first, a tall man with silver temples and a controlled, careful posture. Dominic Harlow. He was a board member of the Hudson Foundation, had been for 6 years. Claire didn't know this. Marcus didn't know this. Marcus sat down. He looked at Dominic Harlow. Dominic Harlow did not recognize him. Why would he? He had never looked at Claire's son. He had barely looked at Claire. Marcus looked at Dominic for exactly 2 seconds, thought of his mother standing outside a diner with a notice taped to the glass, and then turned his attention to the other 2 interviewers and began. He was extraordinary, not showy, not performing, just clear and honest and precise. He talked about his interest in trauma surgery with the specificity of someone who had already decided. Not a dream, but a direction. He talked about his volunteer work at the garden with genuine warmth. He talked about growing up as the son of a single mother with the kind of plain dignity that made one of the interviewers press her lips together to keep her composure. Dominic Harlow watched him. Something flickered in the older man's face. Not recognition. Something more uncomfortable. Interest. Marcus finished his final answer and sat quietly, hands folded. "Thank you, Miss Navarro," one of the interviewers said. "We'll be in touch." Marcus walked out. In the elevator, alone, he exhaled for the first time in 20 minutes. That Saturday at the garden, Lily arrived and she was crying. Not weeping, just those quiet, controlled tears that people cry when they've learned to cry without making noise because there's no one around who will come. Marcus sat down next to her on the bench without a word. After a while she said, "My doctor called my dad. About the headaches, about everything else." She pressed her hands together in her lap. "My blood counts have been off for 6 months. They want to do a bone marrow test." Marcus was quiet. He understood the weight of those words, the way a person who has studied biology understands them, and the weight was significant. "Are you scared?" "Yes." She looked at him. "My dad doesn't know I'm here. He's going to want to put me in a facility or something and control She stopped. "I just wanted one more Saturday." "You can have as many Saturdays as you need," Marcus said. She looked at him for a long moment. Her blue eyes were wet but steady. "You're a strange person, Marcus, I know." "I mean it as a compliment. I know that too." She almost smiled. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her face changed entirely. A subtle hardening, a bracing. "My father," she said. "You should answer it." She answered it. Marcus watched her voice become smooth and careful and daughter-shaped. He watched her stand up and walk to the edge of the garden, her back to him, her shoulders tight. He looked down at her notebook, which she'd left on the bench. The front cover had a small monogram embossed in gold. L.H. He stared at the initials. L.H. He thought of his mother's face outside the diner, the sign on the glass. Harlow Development Group. He thought of the man in the scholarship interview room. Silver temples, cold eyes. Harlow. His brain made the connection with the clean, terrible efficiency of someone who is very good at connecting things. He sat very still. Lily turned back around. Her call was over. "I have to go," she said. "My dad is sending the car." She picked up her notebook. She looked at Marcus's expression. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," he said. "I'll see you next week." But his voice was different, careful, and she noticed. Chapter 6. Everything gets worse. Marcus did not go to the garden the following Saturday. He told himself it was because he had studying to do. He told himself he needed to think. He walked 12 blocks in the wrong direction on Sunday afternoon and ended up in front of Harlow Tower, looking up at its glass face, and then turned around and walked home. He hadn't told Claire about Lily. He had decided on the bench in the garden that he didn't know enough yet to know what telling her would do. His mother had enough weight. Then on Tuesday morning, the phone call came. The Hudson Foundation called Marcus's phone directly. He was in school. He stepped into the hallway to take it. He had not been selected for the scholarship. The woman on the phone was kind but brief. She said the selection process was extremely competitive. She said they hoped he would apply again next year. He stood in the hallway outside his biology class, looking at the scuff marks on the linoleum floor, and held very still. He had not cried since his father's funeral. He was not going to cry in a school hallway. He went back to class. He didn't tell Claire until dinner. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, we'll find another way. Mom, we will find another way. That is not the only door." She reached across the wobbly table and put her hand on his. "That man is not the last word on your future. That man." She didn't know which man had been in that room. Marcus didn't tell her. 3 days later, Claire got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. "Miss Navarro? This is a nurse at St. Augustine Medical Center. We're calling about a patient, Lily Harlow. We understand you're listed as an emergency contact by the patient." Claire frowned. "I think you have the wrong. She listed you under someone who should know." A pause. "She collapsed this morning at a public garden. She's been brought to the ER. Claire sat down. She didn't know who Lily Harlow was, but Lily Harlow had chosen her number. She called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. His voice was strange. "Mom, I have to tell you something. At the hospital, they sat in the ER waiting room, Claire, Marcus, and Sandra, who had refused to stay home. The fluorescent lights hummed. The room smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee." Marcus told Claire everything. About the garden, about Lily, about who her father was. Claire listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "How sick is she?" "I don't know. Her counts were already off. The fact that she collapsed, what's her blood condition?" "I don't know yet." Claire nodded. Her face was unreadable in the way it got when she was holding something very large, very carefully. They waited. 40 minutes later, Dominic Harlow arrived. He moved through the ER doors like a man who had never waited for anything in his life. Long strides, a security guard behind him, a phone to his ear that he lowered when he saw the waiting room. He saw Claire. He stopped. Claire stood up. For 3 full seconds they looked at each other. "You," he said. "Yes," Claire said. "What are you doing here?" His voice was careful, controlled. She could hear the fear underneath it, though, because she had been a triage nurse and she knew exactly what fear sounded like in a voice trying to be authoritative. "Your daughter listed me as a contact. That's not." He stopped. Recalibrated. "Who let her, Mr. Harlow?" Claire's voice was quiet and firm. "Your daughter is in that room, and I am going to stay here until I know she's okay. You can waste the next 10 minutes arguing with me, or you can go be with her." He looked at her. Something crossed his face that she couldn't quite name. Then he turned and walked to the nurse's station. Marcus had not moved. He was sitting completely still, watching. Claire sat back down. She put her hand on his knee. "Breathe," she said. "I am breathing. Breathe better." Chapter 7, the biggest twist. The diagnosis took 4 days. Aplastic anemia, severe. Lily's bone marrow had largely stopped producing the blood cells her body needed. It was serious. It was treatable, potentially. But it required a bone marrow transplant, and for that they needed a donor, a match. They tested Dominic. He was not a suitable match. They began the process of searching the National Registry. The odds were not in Lily's favor. Rare blood type. Specific genetic markers that narrowed the pool severely. The lead hematologist, a gentle, careful woman named Dr. Patel, told Dominic, with the soft directness of someone who had given difficult news many times before. Dominic Harlow, for the first time in perhaps 20 years, did not know what to do with his hands. He sat in a chair in Lily's hospital room. Lily had been moved to a private room, of course, and looked at his daughter, who was connected to monitors and looked smaller than she should, and he felt the specific terror of a powerful man who has reached the edge of what power can do. Marcus heard about the diagnosis from Lily herself via text. They need a donor match. They're searching the registry. Dad's not a match. He read the text 3 times. Then he did something that anyone who understood biology might have done, and that his mother later called the most Marcus thing imaginable. He called the hospital. Not Lily's room. The hematology department. He explained who he was. A volunteer who had spent time with the patient regularly. Someone who wanted to know if there was anything he could do. The nurse was polite but clear. Bone marrow donation required testing, and testing required consent and proper medical channels. Marcus hung up. He sat down at the kitchen table. He pulled out a piece of paper and began to work through genetics the way he understood it. Blood types, law markers, the probability matrices involved in donor matching. Then he thought about something Lily had told him once in passing, that her mother had grown up in the same neighborhood as Marcus's grandmother, had gone to the same community church for years, had eaten at the same tamale stand on Clement Street every Friday night until she was 18 and left for college. He thought about that. He thought about the law markers and the population genetics of shared communities. And then Marcus Navarro, 16 years old, son of a single mother, kid who slept on a pull-out sofa under a diagram of the human circulatory system, went to his mother's room and knocked on the door. "Mom, I think I might be a donor match for Lily." Claire looked at him. "I need to get tested," he said. She was quiet for a very long time. "Okay," she said finally, "let's find out." The test results came back in 72 hours. Dr. Yemi Okafor, the attending physician who had been managing Lily's case, called Marcus's cell phone himself. "Mr. Navarro," he said, "are you somewhere you can talk?" Marcus stepped outside their apartment building into the pale October morning. "I'm here," he said. "Your law markers are a 9 out of 10 match with Lily Harlow," Dr. Okafor said. "That is an extraordinary result. In the National Registry, we are looking at a 1 in 20,000 probability for this level of match for her profile." A pause. "I want you to understand that we are not asking you to do anything. This decision is entirely yours. and it would need to involve your parent or guardian. But I wanted to call you personally because I'll do it, Marcus said. Marcus, I'll do it. But I need to talk to my mom first. He hung up. He looked at the street. A woman was walking a dog. A kid was kicking a can along the curb. The morning was gray and ordinary and alive. He went back upstairs. Chapter 8. Justice begins, Claire said yes before Marcus finished explaining. Not a reckless yes. A considered, careful, informed yes. She was a former nurse. She understood the procedure. Peripheral blood stem cell donation, manageable risks, significant recovery time, meaningful impact. She said yes, and then she said, but I want to be in the room when you tell the hospital, and I want to be there when they tell him. Marcus looked at her. Dominic Harlow, she said, and her voice was not angry. It was something more interesting than angry. It was clear. I want to look him in the face. Dr. Okafor arranged the meeting. It was in a small conference room on the 7th floor of St. Augustine, not the marble and glass of Harlow Tower. Beige walls, a table with a water pitcher, 4 chairs. Claire and Marcus arrived first, Marcus in his blue shirt, Claire in her ironed blouse, the one with the faint crease on the shoulder. Dr. Okafor arrived next, a calm, steady presence with a voice that carried both authority and kindness. Dominic Harlow arrived last. He looked like he had not slept in days, which he hadn't. The tailored suit was slightly rumpled. The silver temples looked less silver than gray. He looked like a man who had been wealthy and powerful his whole life and had just learned that money doesn't make a compatible bone marrow donor. He sat down. He looked at Claire. Then at Marcus. His expression moved through something complicated and private, recognition, confusion, something that might have been the beginning of shame. Dr. Okafor spoke first. He explained the test results. He explained Marcus's match quality. He explained the procedure. Dominic listened. His hands were flat on the table. When Dr. Okafor finished, Dominic looked at Marcus for a long time. Why, he said. It wasn't really a question. It was a man trying to locate the shape of something he didn't understand. Marcus met his eyes. Because she's sick, and I can help. You don't, Dominic stopped. Recalibrated, you don't owe her anything. No, Marcus said, I don't. The word sat in the room. Dominic looked at Claire. Claire was looking back at him with the full weight of the last 2 months, the last 3 years, the rejected interview, and the closed diner, and the cold nights studying on her phone in the back booth. And she said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Dr. Okafor spoke again, walking them through next steps, consent forms, timelines. Dominic barely heard him. He was looking at a 16-year-old boy who slept on a pull-out sofa and grew tomatoes in a community garden, and had just offered to give his bone marrow to the man who had dismissed his mother like she was nothing. Something shifted in Dominic Harlow's face, quietly, irrevocably, like a wall beginning to crack. After the meeting, as Claire and Marcus were putting on their coats, Dominic said, "Ms. Navarro," she turned. He stood up slowly. He looked like a man carrying something very heavy for the first time, because he had always had others carry things for him, and now there was no one, and the weight was his. "I was wrong," he said, "when you came to our office. I was wrong." Claire looked at him. "I know you were," she said. And she put on her coat and walked out with her son. Chapter 9. The emotional reckoning, the donation procedure took place 3 weeks later. Marcus was given 5 days of injections beforehand to stimulate stem cell production. He was tired and achy and mildly dramatic about it, which made Claire and Sandra laugh in the particular way that people laugh when they are also terrified. The day of the procedure, Sandra made chilaquiles at 5 a.m, and they all ate in the kitchen while it was still dark outside, and nobody talked much, and the lamp above the table made a warm circle over the wobbly table, and Claire thought, this is everything. This is absolutely everything. Dr. Okafor was there throughout. He had taken an interest in Marcus that went beyond the case. He had recognized something in the boy immediately, something that reminded him of himself at that age, that particular combination of precision and compassion that makes a great doctor. He had already begun making calls on Marcus's behalf. Lily Harlow received her transplant on a Thursday. She did not know at first that the donor was Marcus. Medical protocols. Anonymous in the short term. Dominic knew. He sat in the waiting room during the procedure, the same waiting room where Claire and Marcus and Sandra had sat weeks before, under fluorescent lights with bad coffee. He sat alone. His security guard was outside. His phone was off. He sat, and he thought, and the wall cracked further. He thought about his wife. Elena, she had grown up 2 miles from this neighborhood, in a small apartment not entirely unlike the one he now knew Claire and her son lived in. He had met her in college, when she was on a full scholarship, and he was on his father's money, and he had loved her so much that it had frightened him. When she died, the frightening part did not stop. It transformed. It became the need to control everything that was left, to manage Lily's world into perfection, to keep poverty and struggle and anything that reminded him of the fragility of the life he'd built at a very great distance. He had not realized until a boy named Marcus Navarro sat across from him and said, "Because she's sick, and I can help," that what he'd been doing all along was running from everything Elena had been, everything Elena had loved about herself. He wept alone in a hospital waiting room, quietly with no one watching. It was the first time he had cried since her funeral. Lily woke up 48 hours after the transplant. Her first words when she could speak were, "Is Marcus okay?" Dominic was sitting beside her. He looked at his daughter, pale and small and already so much like her mother it hurt, and he said, "He's fine. He wants to know how you're doing." Lily's eyes filled. "He did it?" "He actually, yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, Dad, he's my friend." Dominic looked at his hands. "I know. He's the best person I've ever met. I know. His mom is, I know. Lily." His voice broke slightly. He cleared it. "I know." She looked at him. She was 15 and perceptive, and she had spent her whole life learning to read her father's face the way a person learns to read weather. "Dad," she said softly, "are you okay?" And Dominic Harlow, the man who dismissed people, the man who had decided that hardness was intelligence and softness was weakness, the man who had looked at a woman in an ironed blouse and seen nothing worth his time, that man looked at his daughter and said, "No, but I'm going to try to be." 3 weeks after Lily was transferred out of intensive care, Dominic Harlow called Claire. She answered. He asked if he could meet with her. Not at his tower, somewhere of her choosing. She chose the diner on 5th, another one, not Rosie's, a plain place with booth seats and real coffee, and a waitress who called everyone honey. He arrived in a car but walked in alone. He ordered coffee. He said, "I want to offer you the position." the community outreach coordinator role. Claire looked at him. I'm overhauling the division. It was never doing what it claimed to do. He kept his voice even. I want to do it right. I want someone who knows what community actually looks like from the inside. That's not why I would take a job, Claire said. I know. That's why I'm telling you the real reason I'm offering it. He looked at his coffee. Because I looked at you, and I saw exactly what the role needed, and I turned you away because I was. He stopped. The word he needed wasn't one that came easily. Arrogant, I was arrogant. Claire was quiet for a moment. I'm also going to talk to someone about a scholarship, he said. For Marcus, not Hudson, something separate. Something I'm going to fund directly, with no board involvement. Pre-med, if he goes that route. He looked up. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Ms. Navarro. I'm asking what might be useful. Claire looked at this man. She had thought many times about what she would say to him if she ever had the chance. She had imagined the precise, scalding words. She had rehearsed a version of this conversation in her head in the back of a diner and in the dark of her bedroom at 2 a.m. Now she was here, and the words she had prepared were not the words that came. What came was, your daughter told me her mother was from this neighborhood. Dominic went very still. She told Marcus, Claire said gently. He told me. I think, she paused. I think Elena would have loved that garden. His jaw tightened. His eyes went bright. He looked out the window at the ordinary street, the ordinary morning, the ordinary world going about its business. Yes, he said, very quietly. She would have. Claire let the moment hold. Then she said, I'll think about the position. On my own timeline. And Marcus will make his own decisions about school. Of course. And Mr. Harlow, he looked at her. You're going to need to do better than an apology and a job offer. What you build going forward, that's the apology. She stood, picked up her purse. I'll be in touch. She left the money for her coffee on the table and walked out. Chapter 10, the lesson 6 months later. The East Side Community Garden was still there. The cucumber vine had finally surrendered in the October frost. But Marcus had started it again from seed. It was going to take over the trellis again. It always did. Lily was there on a Saturday morning, wearing the flannel, her hair loose, her notebook in hand. She looked stronger. Her cheeks had color. She moved differently, not like someone bracing for the next bad thing, but like someone who had remembered they were allowed to take up space. She was teaching a group of 8-year-olds about soil pH. Marcus stood at the compost bed, watching her, smiling in a way he wasn't fully aware of. Dr. Yemi Okafor had called last week. He had arranged for Marcus to shadow him at the hospital for 6 months, an informal mentorship entirely unofficial, with the understanding that when Marcus applied for medical school in a few years, he would have a letter of recommendation from someone who had personally watched him work. Claire had taken the community outreach position. She had started the week before, and on her first day she had walked into the Harlow Tower lobby, past the marble floor and the too-clean receptionist, and taken the elevator to the 14th floor, and sat down at a real desk with a real chair and a window that faced the city, and she had opened her laptop and started her first email, and the email began, "Here is what this community actually needs." She had also re-enrolled in nursing school, night classes twice a week. Sandra watched Marcus on those nights, And on those nights, Sandra told him stories about his grandfather and let him have 2 portions of dessert, and it was, Sandra said, very good for everyone. Marcus did not yet know about the nursing school. He would find out at Christmas, when Claire put her course completion certificate in a frame under the tree. He would cry. He would try not to. He would fail. Sandra would say, "I told you so," to no one in particular, which was her favorite way of saying "I told you so." On this particular Saturday morning, Dominic Harlow came to the garden. Not in a suit, in ordinary clothes, dark jeans, a plain jacket. He looked like a man still learning how to dress like himself. He stood at the edge of the garden, holding 2 cups of coffee. Marcus saw him first. They looked at each other across the rows of winter grains. Then Marcus crossed the garden and held out his hand. Dominic took it. "How's she doing?" Marcus asked. "Better every week." Dominic looked at his daughter, who was crouching down to show an 8-year-old how to pinch a seedling. The look on his face was the particular look of a man who has almost lost something and knows it. "She's different." "Happier, yeah," Marcus said. "People are different when they feel like themselves." Dominic was quiet. Then he said, "I owe you something I don't know how to give." Marcus shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Marcus, you don't." He looked at Dominic steadily. The same directness he'd had at 16 at the scholarship interview in the conference room. "She's my friend, that's all." Dominic held his gaze. "Then at least let me give you this." He held out one of the coffees. Marcus took it. They stood for a moment, side by side at the edge of a garden, in a city that was full of people living complicated, ordinary, extraordinary lives. "My wife would have grown tomatoes here," Dominic said. "I know," Marcus said. "Lily told me." They drank their coffee. Lily looked up from across the garden and saw them standing there together. She tilted her head. She almost smiled. She wrote something in her notebook. Later, when Marcus asked what she'd written, she showed him everything has a temperature. You just have to know where to look. #tag the lesson here is what this story is really about. It is not about a billionaire being humbled, though he was. It is not about a single mother being vindicated, though she was. It is about a boy who grew up watching his mother carry the world with graceful hands and decided that the measure of a person is not what they have been given, but what they give. Marcus Navarro was rejected along with his mother. His future was dimmed by a man who had decided, based on nothing but pride, that some people matter less than others. And Marcus Navarro saved that man's daughter anyway. Not for reward, not for recognition, not to make a point. He did it because she was sick, and he could help, and that was enough of a reason. That is not weakness. That is the rarest kind of strength. And Dominic Harlow, a man who had spent 20 years building walls around his grief, was finally undone not by confrontation or consequences, but by the simple, undeserved grace of a boy who had every reason to look away and chose to look forward instead. There is a version of this story where Claire's bitterness wins, where Marcus refuses, where the wall between 2 worlds stays solid. But that is not the version that changes anyone. Grace changes people. Unexpected, unearned, freely given grace. If you have ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told that you don't belong in a room, remember this: the room was wrong, not you. And if you have ever been the one doing the dismissing, it is not too late to become something better. The door is still open. The garden is still open. Walk in. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your kindness means everything, just like Marcus's did. Original story. All characters, events, and dialogue are entirely fictional and created for this publication.